Hey VC people, it's Matt again, and I just put up a video answering 15 questions for Beatles fans. And this is the flip side of this. This is another video called 10 Questions for Rolling Stones Fans. Both of these videos, both of these come in response to videos posted by a guy named Jeff, Calico Silver. Put his name in the title there, so go to Calico Silver, check out his channel. It's great stuff. Subscribe. He's got a lot of great content. I think you'll like him. Talked about all that in the Beatles channel. So anyway, without further ado, we'll get right into the questions for the Rolling Stone topic here. First question: Brian, Mick, as in Mick Taylor, not Mick Jagger, or Ronnie Wood? Which do you prefer? It's no contest. Brian Jones. My favorite period of the Stones is the 60s period, the period up to when Brian leaves the band. Mick Taylor's a great guitar player, very talented person. Doesn't seem to have a whole lot of personality one way or the other, but maybe that's because he was just told to shut up and play guitar during his time in the Rolling Stones and never paid attention to his solo work afterwards, so I don't know much about him. I know he's a great guitar player. Ronnie Wood, he fits in with the Stones. He's been there longer than either Brian or Mick Taylor combined. I know a guy that got to meet him and interview him for a newspaper article, said he was a fun interview, good guy. I'm sure he is. He doesn't seem to have a whole lot of, he doesn't seem to bring a whole lot to the band. He does, but not in the way Brian Jones did. I mean, Brian's the guy that started the band. And if not for Brian, I'm not sure, maybe they would have, but I'm not sure that Mick and Keith would have ever gone beyond just playing clubs and dances and so forth around London. Brian's the guy that came up with the band's name. Of course, the dynamic changed. He was the early leader of the band. Everyone considered him to be such. That dynamic changed once Mick and Keith got their songwriting legs under them and figured out they could write songs, and of course Mick being the singer, kind of the front guy and so forth, so that caused a lot of tension. But Brian, unfortunately, apparently couldn't write songs, wasn't very good at it, but he was good at bringing a lot of texture and innovation and flavor and just wonderful magic to the band, he was kind of a terrible person in a lot of ways. I mean, he 6 kids by 6 women. Apparently he didn't have any problem knocking women around. Apparently he could be pretty much a pain in the ass at times, and a very, interesting, wonderful person at another time. But that's true of a lot of people, especially a lot of famous people, unfortunately. So, but once Brian was gone, there was a certain just beauty and wonder and magic and specialness that, even though the Rolling Stones did some really good music after post Brian, in my opinion, it was never as good. Never, well, close at times, but overall never anywhere near as good. And it just wasn't the same. And he definitely brought something to the band that was very much missed once he was gone. Mick Taylor, once he was gone, he's a great guitar player. Give him credit. I'm not wanting to put him down or anything. Ronnie Wood's, sure, he's a great guy. He's just sort of there, but it's got to be Brian. Second question: U.S. or U.K. as far as the albums? Because like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones albums were in America chopped up and cut up, and in England they usually didn't have the hit singles on them, which would be added in America to make more Rolling Stones albums in America than there were in Britain, so that the American record company could sell more records and make more money, because that's what record companies like to do. I went. He had the same question. Jeff had the same question on the Beatles, and I went U.S. for that question. With the Rolling Stones, it's almost a draw, but I'm going to go the UK albums. I love these covers. This is their first album. This is Rolling Stones #2. Here you got pretty innovative. You got the band. Just picture the band. No, doesn't say the Rolling Stones. Doesn't have the title of the album, and that's something even the Beatles didn't do until I don't know, Abbey Road, I guess, right? Uh, but you get a lot of great album cuts. A lot of people say these early Stones are just about the singles more than the albums. I disagree. I love the singles in the 60s, but I think there's some great cuts on these albums that are as good, sometimes better than the singles. And you get all that on the U.S. albums too. If you got to buy more of them than you do with the British albums. Past, well, starting with Satanic Majesty's Request, they've been the same in the U.S. and the U.K. ever since. But early on, I guess I'll go with the U.K. albums for my preference there. The U.S. are good too, but okay. Question number 3 is choice between. We're getting into what's called the Big Four of the Rolling Stones, which is a run of albums that a lot of people tend to rate as their best album, their best run. But the choice being 1968's Beggar's Banquet. I should have got the one with the original cover as it came out, but it's over there and that'll do. That's the cover that they wanted to put out. The record company wouldn't let them put it out in 68, so it wasn't put out this way 2 years later. Anyway, Beggar's Banquet 68 or Let It Bleed from 69. I'm reviewing Rolling Stones albums and I'm up to this one, haven't reviewed it yet, so I don't want to say a whole lot because spoil the review in case you wanted to watch it. But anyway, I'm going to go with Beggar's Banquet. It's a close call. These are both great albums, but Beggar's Banquet just a little bit of an edge over Let It Bleed for me. The other question is the other half of the so-called Big Four, and that is, what's your favorite between Sticky Fingers, 1971, and Exile on Main Street, 1972? Sticky Fingers, for me, is just a little more concise and overall better songs. There's more songs on Exile because it's a double album, but great albums both. But Sticky Fingers is my choice on that question. Number 4, who did you like better in the 60s, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles? I mean, the Beatles, then the Kinks, then probably the Rolling Stones would be my answer on that. But the Beatles on that is just really no contest. And not that the Stones weren't great, but it's the Beatles. Okay, and the second part is a 2-part question. Did you like, after the 60s, the Beatles broke up in 1970, did you like the Rolling Stones or the solo Beatles better through the 70s, I guess? Didn't really get into I don't know that he meant past the 70s into the 80s and 90s, but that's a little trickier because you look at the early 70s, say up to 73, Beatle-wise, you've got, Ram, All Things Must Pass, Living in the Material World, Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, Wildlife, McCartney, the Ringo album. And you look at the early 70s for the Stones, and you've got Sticky Fingers, Exile, and Goat's Head Soup. Great stuff for both. It's pretty close, and I would give the edge to the Beatles, but it's real close there. And then you get into the 73 to, I don't know, 78 or so. So you've got Venus and Mars, Band on the Run. George albums aren't all that great. You got Extra Texture and Dark Horse, which I like, but they're not really great albums. But you do have 33 and a Third, which is a great one. Ringo albums, not so much. You've got Sometime in New York City, which is good, but I like it, but it's not a great album. You got Mind Games and Walls and Bridges, which is really good, though. And then the Rolling Stones, you've got stuff that I'm not really crazy about, like It's Only Rock and Roll and Black and Blue, and I guess Love You Live is in that mix. So I would have to go Beatles, mid-70s. Sorry to break this up, but that's just the way I think about it. And then you get the end of the decade, and really, Rolling Stones wise, all you have is Some Girls, 78, which is great, you know. Beatle wise, you've got Back to the Egg, which is a great one. The George Harrison album, which is a great one. You really don't have much from John because he's on his 5 year retirement thing. Ringo albums, and, I like some of that stuff on them, but not what I would call classic albums by any uh, means, and I don't think anyone else would either. So I guess I give the Stones at the very end of the decade. Much as I love the George and the Back to the Egg album, I guess Some Girls probably edges those two out by a little bit. So Beatles, Stones as far as the 70s in preference there. Did the Rolling Stones do their cover songs proud? Yes, they did, and they're one of the very few bands other than the Beatles that did. I think they're also one of the very few white bands that can actually credibly play the blues. Nobody's going to confuse the Rolling Stones with Big Bill Broonzy or Muddy Waters or Howling Wolf or B.B. King, but I think they do a much better version than most of the time when white bands do the blues. It's either boring as hell or pretty chintzy, or it's just so overly reverent that it just doesn't work in my book. So when you're listening to stuff like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Eric Clapton or I don't know, a bunch of other people, it's boring to me. But I think and most of their cover songs were blues, even though they did Motown cover songs, they did Chuck Berry, stuff like that. And I think their covers on their early albums, I think they're really pretty good. I think what do they do? Just My Imagination on Some Girls. They do it a little different than was that Four Tops, the Temptations, or the Four Tops Temptations, I believe. Anyway, a good version on that. So yeah, I think the Rolling Stones did a really, really fine job overall on cover songs. There's a few clunkers in there, but overall they really good at it. Favorite post 1981 album, because Jeff was saying that most people kind of cut off the classic Stones period with the Tattoo You album. So my favorite album, and I'm not overly I kind of lost interest past that point too, to be honest. A friend of mine that I'm a big Beatles fan, he loves the Beatles, but his band is the Stones, is his favorite band. He continued buying all those albums, so I have heard them. Bridges to Babylon, Steel Wheels, Bigger Bang Theory, all that stuff. But I haven't heard them enough to really be familiar with them. And what I heard of them just sort of sounded like recycled Stones, generic Stones sound by and large. But I don't know, the one with trying to think of a good one. I guess my favorite one, really, and I wish it would have been a hit. The one that came out in 2020, it wasn't an album, it was a single, but it's like it's called "Living in a Ghost Town." It's just put out as a single, which is kind of should have been the theme song of 2020 with all the mess going on and the shutdowns and everything. And I think that was the first song of theirs that I've heard since, Undercover of the Night. Was that the name of that album that came out after Tattoo You? I did like some of the stuff on there, and I liked the song Undercover, which was funny because my buddy, who's the big Stones fan, hates that song. He thought, that they're doing something different. They shouldn't be doing that. And it doesn't. I thought it was great that they were doing something different, and I like the sound of that. And that album had a few good songs, but really, I'll go with the single that came out last year as my favorite thing that they've done post 1981. Favorite Keith song comes down to two, and I pretty much like all the Keith songs. It's always fun to hear a Keith song, but I'm going to go with Before They Make Me Run off Some Girls. Watch My Taillights Fading. There ain't a dry eye in the house, because they're laughing and singing. So Before They Make Me Run, I really love that. The one that would probably almost tie with it would be Happy off of Exile. Stones album I guess it was album, not song. Stones album you didn't like at first, but love now would be um none really, but and I find this hard to believe, but when I first got this, and this would have been when I was probably around eighth, seventh, around eighth grade or so. It took me a while to warm up to this. There were some songs on there that I loved right off, but the majority of it, I was just kind of because I'd already had by this point Sticky Fingers and Beggar's Banquet and some others, and I loved all of those. And like I said, I can't believe now that I didn't just take to this instantly, but it took a few spins and a few listens to warm up to this. And my buddy John, the Stones fan, he loved this one right off, but it took me a little while to. And then there's a couple of Stones albums that I don't really like that I, as far as I know, still don't. But that wasn't the question. So, favorite live album. I thought about Still Life because I saw the '81 concert in Halloween of 1981 at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, pouring down rain. We were standing by the end of the concert. We were on the floor in front of the stage, and we were standing in about that deep of water by the end of the concert. Just a I mean, which sounds like a pain in the ass, but when you're, I don't know, what was I, 17, I guess. So stuff like that doesn't really matter when you're that age. You're just young and stupid and having fun. Great concert, and Still Life was a concert album from the '81 tour. Not the greatest album, but for sentimental reasons. But I mean, it's got to be this one because I'm not a huge fan of live albums, but this is a great live album. This is one of the exceptions. This is one of the great live albums of all time. And so this is from the '69 tour, and I think that's what most people would choose. But there's the Brussels Affair, which wasn't an official album until just recently. Finally got officially released, was a bootleg for years, and they're putting out more and more. But I think you got to go with Ya Ya's Out. If you could only have one Stones album, you had to get sent off to a desert island and could only take one Stones album for the rest of your life, which one would it be? Well, Jeff, that's easy. This will be the Stones album I'm going to go with. That's okay. So, no, but seriously, most people probably going to pick something from the Big Four, or maybe Some Girls or something like that. But I love this album, and it's my favorite Stones album. If this is in fact in my top 10 favorite albums of all time by anyone. And it's funny because this is a Stones album where they sound the least like the Rolling Stones and the most like the Beatles or the Kinks, but there's still Rolling Stones sound in here, and this is 1967's Between the Buttons. American or UK version, they're both great. The American has Ruby Tuesday and Let's Spend the Night Together, where the UK doesn't, and there's some other song differences. But yeah, I just love this album. Love the cover, love the music. There's not a song on here that I don't love. And my favorite album of the Stones, and love this period. I don't think Mick likes this album much, or he didn't at the time. I don't know what he thinks about it now that he's 105, and I don't really remember hearing anything from Brian or Keith or Bill or Charlie about their thoughts on the album, but Charlie did the cartoons and a little poem on the back. And that's my favorite Stones album. So there is, when I take to Desert Island, there is 10 Rolling Stone questions for you, Jeff, and I hope you enjoy the responses. Still watching stuff on your channel, getting to just discovered it here recently, so still a lot of stuff to watch, and I'm enjoying everything I'm seeing so far. Interesting stuff, and take care, everybody.